This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Welcome to Teacher Talk Radio, the podcast that brings you inspiring conversations with educators from around the world. I'm your host, James Rabin, and this is The Late Show. In today's episode, we have a special guest who will shed light on the fascinating world of instructional coaching.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, and joining us today will be Zach Groeschel, an experienced American educator turned school leader. He has a PhD in instructional design and hosts the Progressively Incorrect podcast with a passion for instructional coaching. Zach, based in Seattle, he's an instructional coach and he's helped many educators unlock their full potential and create impactful learning experiences for their students. In this episode, we explore the role of instructional coaching in education, its benefits, its practical strategies that teachers can implement in their classrooms. Whether you're an educator looking to enhance your teaching practice or something in the field of education, this episode will provide you with those valuable insights and inspiration. So grab a cup of coffee or a drink on this late Friday night and get ready to enjoy this engaging conversation as we dive into the world of instructional coaching with Zach Groeschel. Now, I would normally say let's dive straight in at this point, but we do always have technical issues on this show, and so at the moment, Zach has just announced he has been booted out of. So we'll just hold on for a few minutes and he will get, hopefully he will be able to join us. Now, instructional coaching is a fascinating area, something in particular that me as an educator I've looked at recently within our trust to see how we can use it as a piece of school improvement and a way to support teachers to really guide them, give them that guidance they need to get better. It is a far cry from what you would say and opposite to what is around there. But tonight, I know Jack, especially Zach, as he is in America, will show us a different way and what it looks like in America as well. So, it's going to be a interesting conversation. Now, one of the things that we will come back to and talk to is the massive raise and in the last few years.
Hello? Hi there.
Hello. Right, are you all okay there, Sack?
I'm okay now. Yeah, I'm alone.
Yeah, your connection's really bad here. It's sounded broken quite a lot. Is it possible for you to go like closer to your router or something if it says the network's quite poor?
Let me see. How does that sound now?
That's a lot better. That's a
Okay.
lot better. Right, so what I'm going to
Perfect.
do is I'm going to start the show again, and I'll do the intro and everything else, and then I'll just say at the end, I'll get them just to cut the first 8 minutes off and do that if that's okay.
Okay, thank you so much. You can hear me just fine? Just
Yeah,
you
I
sound
can
good.
hear you just fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's fine. Well, I'll meet you just to start off with, and then we can get going.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Welcome to Teacher Talk Radio, the podcast that brings you inspiring conversations with educators from around the world. I'm your host, James Fabin, and this is The Late Show. In today's episode, we have a very special guest who will shed light on the fascinating world of instructional coaching. Join us.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So joining us today is Zach Groeschel, an experienced American elementary teacher turned school leader. He has a PhD in instructional design and hosts the Progressively Incorrect podcast. With a passion for instructional coaching, Zach is based in Seattle and is an instructional coach. He's helped educators unlock their full potential and create an impactful learning experience for their students. Now, in this episode, we're going to explore the role of instructional coaching in education, its benefits, its practical strategies that teachers can implement in their classrooms. Whether you're an educator looking to enhance your teaching practice or someone interested in the field of science, this episode will provide valuable insights and inspiration. So grab a cup of coffee or something stronger if you're over here in England and it's the end of half term and it's lovely and sunny outside tonight. And get ready to start with this engaging conversation as we dive into the world of instructional coaching with Zach. Without further ado, let's jump straight in. Welcome, Zach, finally. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm in near Seattle, Washington right now in the United States. It is really good weather this time of year. I'm happy to be on. It's funny, you're at the end, you said, of half term, so and to talk about instructional coaching, that's I guess that's a good time to talk about it when everyone's kind of burnt out and everything. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, a pleasure. Yeah, it's a great way in England in some ways now to start looking at it. We've got another 7-week term coming up. I know some people in Ireland are actually finishing at the moment, but it gives us a chance to think about next year, next academic year, and getting all of these processes in place and looking at our school development plans as well. Kind of want to dive really into your role, where you've got to start off with. And I know this evening and through this podcast, we're going to explore instructional coaching two parts. And part one's really going to explore what it is, your role and what you've done and what works. And I think part two, we really want to perhaps some of those dogmas of instructional coaching, some of those things that we may kind of not get straight away. We may do our coaches a disservice in some ways. And I know you've got some interesting thoughts in there. So, Zach, introduce yourself. What's your journey through education to your current role?
Well, first, I am an instructional coach, and I know that that means something different depending on what country you're in, what system you're in, even the school level. We talk about different types of instructional coaches. Maybe you can answer me this question, which is like, what for you in England, what is an instructional coach? And maybe I can like bridge kind of what I do with that definition, or that that idea of a role.
Yeah, so over here in England, we don't really have a dedicated role that is an instructional coach in some ways. And often my sector is more primary, and I work across a primary mat of 15 schools. We really are looking at the teaching and learning leads. And so we have some schools that are 5, 6 form entry. So for a primary school, that's massive. We have some that are 1 form size schools. So I think our smallest school is about 120 and our biggest school is about 850 children. But what often we have is the leaders of teaching and learning, they coach a series of teachers, and then sometimes that is then down and they coach others as well. So we have that. If you are very lucky, it's a dedicated role as an assistant head or deputy, and they take their time to do that through a professional development sequence within schools. But we don't often, and please add into the chat, but I haven't seen many, if any, roles that are dedicated instructional coaches over here. One thing that we do have, and I know I'll probably bring it up later, is we have early career teachers, our ECTs. So within the first 2 years of your career, you go on this almost instructional coaching plan, and you work on with Step Lab and Ambition, a really progressive instructional coaching idea where you go in and get supported by your mentor once a week if it's your first year, and then when you go to your second year, it's once every fortnight. And I'm a newly ECT mentor as well, so seeing it support them in class is a really interesting, and it's a far cry from what we've had previously as well.
Wow. Well, so that all tracks with what I understand too. Like, I follow a lot of people: Josh Goodrich, Peps McRae, Tom Sherrington, lots of people that are really into the instructional coaching world over on your side of the pond. But over here, like you suggested, really instructional coaching's become a dedicated role for schools. And in my district, we have a ton of schools. I mean, we have 5 high schools and dozens of middle schools and many, many more primary schools. Each of these buildings has one person who fills the role of instructional coach, while all of the teachers who perhaps maybe should be promoted to a level of like head of year, head of department, or whatever, those roles don't exist. So that most teachers are teaching a full timetable, and the assistant principals, or the top leadership, are really focused in on behavior, dealing with parents. A lot of it is policy and really much more bureaucratic stuff than I have to deal with. And there sort of was this gap in all these schools where who's actually leading the charge for the learning, who's actually helping the teachers become better, beyond sitting at the staff table or after school, meeting with other teachers, who's actually mentoring them, who's helping them build their capacity. And so that's what I do. I'm in a middle school, which is grades 6 through 8, which I think for you is years 7 through 9. And I work in a school of 800 or so students, high needs, highly disadvantaged population in this area. Some would argue it sort of has a reputation in this area for this school like needing a lot more support. And so that's the role I fill. And you can imagine many challenges in just that role that we will discuss further in this podcast.
Yeah, fascinating. I think this is one of those conversations where hopefully you'll learn a lot from the practices within England, especially with Peps McCree, Tom Sherrington, Josh Goodrich. I'd like to throw in John Hutchinson with that as well, and what he's been doing in Ambition, the ECT program. And I know we're going to learn a lot from you in America and what you do as well. So this divide across the pond will hopefully get smaller, and we can learn from each other as we go through what is seen as a real big improvement in professional development and the research that's come out of that as well. But one of the questions I always ask my guests is, what's your purpose? What has inspired you to work in education? Because I think that really gets to the crux of where you are now, that really core values of you, your role, and almost how you got there as well. So what's your purpose then, Zach?
Well, I mean, I started as a teacher and I taught in primary school for 8 years. And throughout that time, um, I, I just always sense there's something wrong. There's something off. We're asking teachers that are brand new to, after putting a lot of money, lots of times into their college education, we're asking them to sort of jump into the deep end of the swimming pool and just figure out teaching on their own. And when I first started, I was teaching third grade, so year 4, and I was given some pretty structured materials, which was great, and I was given a lot of support from my colleagues that were next door, but I was really missing out on that third piece, which was someone by my side, someone helping to build my capacity, someone who kind of stop. Like we all know that this pure discovery learning is just bad for students. I needed someone to end a period of extended struggle and trial and error problem solving when it came to my classroom. And so, like you asked about the purpose, it was actually towards the middle of my first year that the instructional coach at that school finally made their way to me. They had been, dipping in and out of all these different classrooms, maybe less systematic than what you what you described in terms of what you've seen. And they finally made it to me, and I was giving this lesson about, it was a math lesson, and I was sort of telling a big old story about maybe I was at a market in Egypt or something, and I was haggling and trying to use my negotiating skills. And I was telling this really great story, and all the kids were really, really hooked on this story. And then I had them go off and sort of solve math problems. And these math problems were only like peripherally related to this story I had told. And afterwards, I met with this instructional coach, and he broke this down for me. And honestly, it kind of hurt my feelings. I really tried hard to put that lesson together. And he was basically telling me it made no sense. It was incoherent. What I was telling didn't lead to what they needed them to do. And then when I was having them do it, the behaviors, in my perspective, they were calm and quiet, but for him, he didn't see it that way. He saw it that every single student should be on task, pencils moving, eyes on the problems. And so his expectation of what great teaching looks like and his model of what's good teaching was that of an expert teacher, and mine was as a novice teacher who had so far been doing this discovery learning stuff. Working with him, we went through a process of he modeled lessons, he co-taught lessons where he would sort of interject or slide in during my lessons. And he would say things that I still say today, like that I didn't even know you could say. Like he would look over and say, "Hey, Tommy, he's on fire. Oh my goodness, Janessa, look at her, how focused she looks." And he'd be, gesturing with his arms, sort of almost like, madly gesturing, and he would fill the room with his presence and confidence. And I would start doing that, and I started to take on that role. And after a while, he figured that I had figured out math well enough that he could move on to other areas of my teaching. So, I mean, my purpose, I think, is to be that person. His name was Pat McGregor. Is to be the Pat McGregor of any school I'm at. Someone who arrives at just in time to end your trial and error and your suffering, really, and to give you the tools and to give you the structures that will allow you to be a really great teacher.
I think that's so elegantly put, and I think it's really important that you have you really know why you're doing this role and the impact it's had on you. Often it's that, isn't it? You've had a positive impact, or it's the opposite. You've had a negative impact of something on your career, hence why it should be better in some way. And I think it's a real privilege, hopefully you agree that seeing other teachers and seeing other schools and seeing other classrooms is such a privilege in teaching, and it's one way that you can really develop you not only as a coach but as a teacher and see actually what are those common themes. One of the things I often say to my teachers and schools and heads that I work with is we overcomplicate. Let's go back to the crux. Why? What are you doing and why? What's the impact? And it's almost that cause and effect element of what you see in kindergarten or early years, and that's what children explore. And you've got to think about what are those opportunities we're doing in that classroom, because everything we should be doing is for the children at the end of the day. So I want to kind of explore this idea of, do you need to be an expert in teaching and learning? Because instructional coaching goes beyond that traditional professional development models, because it provides, as you said, that personalized support and guidance, fostering growth, effectiveness, that co-teaching, that mentoring, that modeling. And it's that collaboration between what is a skilled instructional coach as an educator and focus on those specific pedagogical strategies and reflective. So how do you need to then, going back to my question is, to become a coach, do you need to be an expert in how learning happens? And then also on that, how do you know what you're looking for when you go in and coach someone?
Yeah, well, to the idea of how learning happens. I mean, what we mean, I think you mean by that would be sort of, do you have what Dan Willingham calls like the mental model of the learner? Like, do you understand sort of the cognitive architecture of of the learner and how that interacts with the environment, with tasks that you give students? I mean, we've learned so much. I think, and a lot of it comes down to what England, I think, has taken this torch and really run with it through things like research ed and a lot of the great books coming out of like John Catt that I read all the time. But the idea that like working memory, for example, is extremely limited. That you can override the limitations of working memory if you have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge in long-term memory. Do you understand retrieval, right? Like if instead of starting a lesson by re-exposing the students to something they should be able to recall, that you start by having them recall it or retrieve it. Do you understand the negative effects of multitasking, of having divided attention? So if I'm teaching and I'm telling some instructions and the students are supposed to be writing at the same time, can I recognize that there's going to be an interference? The list goes on and on. It's sort of one of those things where the more I read and the more I develop my expertise around what cognitive science, how that can inform the classroom, the more I see things in other people's classrooms that give me, perfect, ammunition or, fodder to discuss with them. I just think you have to have that mental model of learning. You have to understand how learning happens to be able to recognize problems in classrooms, because instructional coaching is a problem-solving job. And of course, you need to be motivated. You need to have characteristics of being a leader, being a good person, being someone who can build relationships with people. I think that's kind of emphasized maybe too much in some of the literature, where really you also need to have knowledge. You need to come into a classroom and just have seen so many classrooms and so many situations, but also understand how individuals tend to process information and how teaching techniques, where's the why behind some of these teaching techniques, not just the what. Because without all of this, you end up being an instructional coach who really doesn't know what to tell teachers, what to say to them after their lessons. You can sense that something is wrong, but you don't really have an explanation, or you don't really have anything to dive into with them. So I think I'm just so impressed with how organizations like Research Ed and different school leaders in the UK have sort of taken the charge and led this area around cognitive science. I think it's absolutely essential. Yeah.
And it goes back to what are those the research all about? What are those best bets, isn't it? And as you say, you have a feeling, you go into the classroom and you kind of know, like, oh, there's lots of different things here, but it's working out what do you need to work on? How can I work with that teacher? And some teachers really love you modeling and collaborating with them. And some of those teachers are like really reluctant as well. So what are then some of those key qualities, those interpersonal skills for you as a coach that you think are necessary to ensure that relationship you have with your coachee is amicable, but also professional, but in a way that you can be like that Pat McCree and inspire you in your career as well?
Right. I mean, it's tough for me to answer that because I personally don't really struggle with the relationship side of working with teachers. I don't tend to have that many interpersonal sort of issues with teachers I work with. So it's like, how do I break down what I do and what I've seen from other coaches into like really granular, units, or what are those leadership traits? I just think if you ask yourself too, you can imagine this person, like who is this person that you'd really want to go to for support? It's someone that is extremely credible. Like they've taught the subject that you've taught for quite some time, or they've taught things similar to it, and they're able to show you their knowledge. They just love teaching and teaching research. They're able to, they have a library full of things they can bring to any discussion, and they're somebody that also understands what it means to be a teacher. When you ask teachers here, why did someone become an instructional coach? You'll get answers like they did it because they couldn't hack it in the classroom. They didn't have the behavior management skills, or they just didn't really like kids. So they had to leave somehow, right? Or maybe they'll say that they're actually striving upwards. They're career hopping. They're trying to become principals or superintendents or whatever else is next. They'll say things like that. So like, what do you need to have that makes them think twice about that? Your motives, that you actually became an instructional coach because you want to help teachers get better at teaching, and you're not there to evaluate them. You're not there to you're there to critique their teaching in a sense, but you're not there to put them on blast, to tell on them, to tattletale to the principal about their skills, or to spread the information about their teaching to the rest of staff. Oh, look at this teacher. Yeah, they're really struggling. Look at this teacher. They're really great. They don't want someone who's comparing and making judgments like that. They want someone who's objective and who looks at teaching a lot more like a science, I think, who breaks down teaching into smaller steps and focuses on those individual steps, as opposed to maybe getting too zoomed out and looking at there's good teachers and there's bad teachers, and there's people that care and there's people that don't care. So I don't know. I come into school every day. I walk across the parking lot, and I give kind of, I give myself like a mental pep talk. Like, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to smile and I'm going to enjoy every moment of this. And I'm going to try to make those little conversations in the hallways with all these different teachers I'm going to meet. I'm going to make those really productive. And I find it to be really successful. I guess I just don't emphasize this part of my instructional coaching as much as the knowledge and the cognitive science, because I think really that's the area a lot of coaches, in my experience, don't really know much about.
Yeah, and I think it comes almost from how long, okay, in America, you've got this history of instructional coaching, so it's almost a preconceived thing that someone there. So actually what you really need to focus on is make sure you've got the knowledge. Whereas almost over here in the UK and England in particular, where we used to have judgments where you would come in 2-3 times a year, people with clipboards, so judge you as a good, outstanding, or requires improvement lesson. They give you a few targets. They come back in 3 months' time and go through that. And it's not that personal relationship to actually support that. It's not reciprocal. And so there is still in lots of schools that reluctance from teachers, however well-informed and good intention the coaches are, those being coached, they're still reluctant to that support, and they find any conversation is a judgment. And I know I've had to break down a lot of those barriers, and just with some of the teachers I've gone in and worked with recently, because that was this culture that they were in that school. And I know there's quite a lot of books out now about building culture and teams and with instructional coaching. And as you said, the whole movement of even the Teacher Talk Radio and Research Ed and with the ECT program, I think those barriers are slowly breaking. And I think that also comes massively that over there across the pond, you have instructional coaches. So it may be a slightly different barrier over there, and you've got to make sure actually your coaches have that cognitive science background in terms of it. What I'd be really interested in discussing really is that what is that coaching cycle? I know you mentioned it before where you would have seeing other teachers, you modeling, you may be doing some planning with it, but what would you say is an effective coaching cycle with someone? And also, how do you know which teachers do you work with as well? Do you go, is there a timetable where you work with them all, or is there and all of that element? So it'd be really interesting to see the mechanisms of what you do as a coach.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's kind of three parts to a coaching cycle that most people are familiar with. There's sort of like a pre kind of coaching part of it, maybe like meeting with the teacher, sort of identifying strengths, just discussing. That's where, like, to your point of breaking down barriers, that's where I find a lot of success, right? I sit with them and I just kind of have a laugh sometimes at some of the hardships that they go through, hardships I've had, right? I know the students in this building. Like when they mention certain students, we have a laugh because it's funny how hard they make our lives sometimes, right? And so you're sitting there and you're chatting up and then, you start to make a plan about, what this teacher wants or what I have to bring to the table. And we'll get to the dogmas at the next portion, but I think I've been more emphasizing what I bring to this discussion more than their own personal goals and growth recently, and I found that to be more effective. But basically, it's a period of sort of let's set up this coaching cycle so that you are well aware of what you have the right expectations for what this is going to be about, and we can make a plan. Let's put it into the timetable. Let's put it in the calendar. I don't work with too many teachers at once. I mean, there are 40, 50 teachers here. I don't know. I stick to 4 or 5 teachers at a time, and our district has set up a six-week cycle, but it's really flexible. Like if I wanted to work with one teacher for the entire year and just do multiple so-called coaching cycles, I could. If I wanted to sort of skip around, let's say you get to an expert teacher and you're sitting in that class and you're just watching amazing teaching and you make some adjustments with them and you have some discussions, but really it's just like, is my work really, is my time and my salary and all that, is it really being used the most efficiently, or can I move to someone who needs a little bit more support? I'll do that. But I keep it limited. And then really that middle part of the coaching cycle is being in classrooms. I see so much hesitation or almost fear amongst instructional coaches that I talk to about actually getting in there, actually getting, boots on the ground inside classrooms as much as possible. And even for me, there have been times where behavior has sort of flared up in the building. There's just been testing or there's field trips, there's just things that are interrupting the schedule, and you start to make excuses almost of not getting into the classroom. But sometimes just being in the classrooms it's a little tedious. It can get a little boring sometimes. You've seen so many lessons in a row. But I really do emphasize getting into the classrooms and then using just a few moves that most people would recognize. I slide in during their teaching and I sort of add some co-teaching. If I give them a preview beforehand of what I might say, or we're working on something like maybe creating small groups in the back table through formative assessment. So beforehand, we talked about we're going to be using many whiteboards to assess students' knowledge on this particular topic. So once you know that the student can do that thing, once you've identified students who cannot do that thing, you're going to be moving students back to that back table. I'm going to be circulating for the rest of the students so that you can really focus on your small group instruction. and then let's see if we can fade me out and you can get this as a routine. I mean, I just did that the other day. And then, finally, I guess the last part of a traditional coaching cycle is just reflection or, next steps, maybe looking at maybe creating new goals. So all of that really depends on the teachers having planning, having time to meet with you, and wanting to meet with you if it's optional to work with a coach.
That's a very similar approach almost to the ECT program, where you have that planning, working in the classroom, and that time for reflection. And I think that's often a oversight, that you don't plan in that proper time to sit down, talk to the teacher, and reflect. And I think one of the questions I wrote down while listening to you there is, how do you get teachers upskilled with that knowledge of cognitive science almost as well? And that almost reading and research you've done, how do you discern that into something that is tangible for teachers, for them to take, kind of absorb that information and then put into practice within the classroom?
Yeah, it's really tough. There's the mental model of the learner that, the kind of the true, more, it's not the non-controversial part of working memory is limited and long-term memory is unlimited and so on, that there's the opposite of that too. There's the other side where teachers sort of, I think, have maybe a naive interpretation of what, how a learner learns. Maybe they think of the brain as like a muscle, and the more you throw at it, it will sort of exercise and become stronger. The more you throw at it, things will just sort of stick. And they don't see the cognitive architecture in the way that they should, that would allow them to make predictions, that would allow them to explain why something is going wrong, that would allow them to sort of make plans in the future that would be more likely to work. So it's hard, but to your question, how do I sort of get teachers to learn these cognitive science principles? We have whole school PD that I lead. That way, I can kind of get everybody to hear the same thing all at once. And then when I'm working in the coaching cycles, I refer back to that PD. Remember when we did this? Remember we talked about this? This is how it applies specifically to something you just did. I have a whiteboard in my office. So oftentimes we meet in my office, or I'll use their whiteboard in their classroom. And sometimes I'll just draw out what I'm talking about, and discuss kind of like, do you see how what we just saw, it relates totally to this model that we're developing. And this is why it failed. You suspected it failed, and and we've agreed it has. This is why. I run book clubs. We read books together. I have research articles I send out. There's no real way of checking if they read them, but I send out research and I put them in people's pigeonholes, but really I think it's that cycle of taking whole school PD or small group PD and bringing it back into the coaching cycle, referring back to it often and always.
Yeah, and that whole school PD is an interesting one, because one of the conversations that I often get lots with coaches is this concept of, when you work with the individual teacher, should it be a target that's individual for them in their classroom, or should it be a whole school, something on the school development plan, or could it be a combination of both? And I think what you're almost alluding to a little bit is that there is space for that whole school element as well of professional development. We all notice a theme across your classes, that actually retrieval practice. So what could this look like? Here's the cognitive science, and I'll come in and coach in terms of that. What are your thoughts in regard to that?
Well, I have many thoughts on that. And also, like, to add to what you said, like, also another thing we hear is that whole school PD maybe just doesn't work that well. That it's so abstract or divorced from the reality of the classroom that it's very hard for any of it to get into the classroom. And there's probably reading some research on that. That's probably the case on average. myself, I always took the mindset that when I'm in this PD, I'm going to get something out of this. Like, I don't care. I don't care if this is the worst PD ever. I'm going to either take away something I can do, or I'm going to take away something that I'm never going to do as a result of this PD. But I'll be the first to say and apologize to all of these PDs that my PE teachers, maybe my art teachers, maybe my orchestra or music teachers have had to sit through that had very, very little to do with their context. On the other hand, beyond the sort of domain-specific or subject-specific training, there are some things that all classrooms have in common. I think it was Adam Boxer who recently tweeted, he's like, you can talk about domain-specific PD, and subject expertise and all of that forever, but you can go into, he was saying he goes into so many classrooms and half the kids aren't listening. I mean, that's half of what I do. I feel like, at least in this context, is make sure that the kids are paying attention, that they have some sort of buy-in into the lesson, that that you can see sort of behaviorally, at least, that they are writing things down, that they are raising their hands, that they are not cutting off the teacher, that they're not taking over the classroom, taking the control and the authority away from the teacher. So there are things that it's a little bit of both. There are techniques and there are strategies that apply everywhere. And we have a sort of basic level that every classroom, I think, should meet, which is that kids are paying attention, listening in the classroom, and that works for everybody. But I do feel for those subject teachers who feel like most of the PD doesn't really apply to their classrooms too.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you said about those basic elements. I read something the other day that if you imagine you wasted 5 minutes of every lesson, that's 20 minutes a day, that's 100 minutes a week. Imagine what that's like over a course of an academic year. That's a lot of time wasted. And if you don't have those high expectations and you don't have that element where behavior and listening and the basic needs are there, it's very hard to build and do that. And I think then it is, especially, I think it leads nicely into my next question about novices almost, that's almost what you need to support them with. They may be working in a school with high levels of deprivation and disadvantaged children, and they may need to look on their routines and what does that look like as well. And I think there is an idea that everyone, to a degree, needs coaching. It may look different, but they all do. And the other point you made, which is about professional development, is the report that came out with the EEF. And I think it's Sam Sims wrote a few years ago that
Professor Wood, right?
Yeah, wrote that instructional coaching was one of the best pieces of research informed. And then I met him and we were talking about it, and he said about this research it came out was actually you need to be mechanism rich. So any professional development, whatever format it goes through, needs to make sure you build knowledge, you motivate staff, you develop those teaching techniques, and you embed that into practice. And sometimes that will work whole school. Sometimes, though, the best way is to do that within instructional coaching. So if you take this idea of instructional coaching and you only ever do the in the classroom element, well, actually only developing teaching techniques, you're not really building that knowledge of that cognitive science, not really embedding it because you're not reflecting on that process. So however good what PD you do is, or whether it is instructional coaching, if you don't include enough of these mechanisms, you're not making as much impact as possible with it as well.
So, yeah, I love that. And the paper you just referenced is the one I alluded to exactly. And I think that allows us to not sort of judge, like there's other forms of professional learning, like lesson study, for example, or there's whole school PD or this instructional coaching. It doesn't make us sort of judge these against each other. It makes us look at what are the ingredients in each of these things. And if you have all the right ingredients, it doesn't really matter what the format is. It will drive professional learning. It's much more likely, at least.
Excellent. One of the questions I'm interested in, and particularly alluding to when I talked about ECTs, that at the moment it's a very comprehensive program that you've got over here. But how would you approach coaching a novice teacher compared to someone who's quite an expert teacher and maybe in the game for quite a long time? How would your approach differ, or would it differ at all?
I think it totally differs. The you know, in my experience working with new teachers, is that they are, I mean, they're game for anything. They're gung ho. They're excited. They're motivated. But also, maybe this gets the idea of being performance oriented or being learning oriented. They really do want to perform for this school. They want to show that it was worth them being hired. They want to show that they're not the worst teacher in the world. That they learned something during their training and their student teaching. So they really want to impress, just like I did in my first story. They really want to impress people around them, but they just don't have the experience in the classroom. They don't have the knowledge, and their teaching programs. I hear the same over there. I think it's a worldwide phenomenon. Their teaching programs often don't give them very useful things and tools to use when they get into the classroom. They may even have what I would consider, and this is what my podcast about. So it's just sort of that kind of romantic, maybe sort of constructivist view of teaching, with the learner sort of should be self-directed, that they should discover things on their own. That teacher talk is going to stop them from learning. That teachers shouldn't have the authority. That projects are really important, and group work is really important. And if you are a school where all those things I just said are things your school is encouraging, then fine, right? But this gets the buildings and culture, and the particular building I'm in, we're more focused on ensuring students are in seats, that they are not in the hallways or vaping in the bathrooms, that they are attending to the teachers' lessons, that they are moving through the curriculum at a brisk pace. So they come to us with all of these preconceived ideas, with lots and lots of motivation and enthusiasm for teaching, but also they're very, very easy to be embarrassed and very easy to be to feel. They sort of feel, what's the word I'm looking for? Like that imposter syndrome, right? They feel like imposters. They feel like they've just been hired, but sometimes they don't want to be exposed as someone who cannot teach. And so you put all of that together, and you just have a lot of fun in my job. You work with these teachers to say, hey, you can trust me. I've been doing this for a bit. I taught for a lot longer than I've even been doing this. And these are the things that got me started. These are the things that made my life easier, that made the job more efficient. And so when we get to some of these topics that I just mentioned, like group work, I might say, I saw that group work kind of falling apart. You know what I would do? And they'd say, what? And I would say, I would delay that group work for another day and just get the basics down. Let's get all the kids turning towards you so that when you explain, they hear it, right? And then you get these big sighs of relief. Oh my goodness, I was trying to move mountains as a new teacher, and you've given me the right to be practical, and you've given me sort of the permission to break down this into more concrete terms, more granular, and you're going to work with me, and you're here to support me. That's how I work with new teachers. Should I go into expert teachers?
Yeah, and I think going back to new teachers, and my experience of coaching ECTs this year, it's really that clarity of thought. That when we go in, we don't have any preconceived ideas. It's not our class. We're not at the front of the class almost performing, which is kind of what teaching back in some ways a few years ago seemed like. You are performing, and we've had to explore through COVID different ways for explaining and modeling ourselves, and this element actually, I think it allowing teachers to say, okay, well, let's step back and go back to those basics. What are we trying to do here, and that why? I think just someone else to bounce those ideas off. I know you work with children all day as teachers, but it can often seem lonely if you are in a single form entry school. If you're on a wider school, at least you have your PPA that you can talk about lessons. How would I approach this? But even then, the days are so tight and there's so much to do, and the workload, that's another story. But actually, do you have that time to talk about teaching and learning? What is the impact? And if you talk to teachers, they're not leaving the profession because they don't miss the teaching and learning. It's all the other bits. And I think the idea of instructional coaching, giving it even just that time to have those conversations and think, yeah, okay, I'm going to step back, make a professional judgment here. Let's go back and let's, as you say, stop that group work and dive into get those basics right. And I think that's probably a cool thing to come back through with this. Yes, let's talk about how you would coach experts, and then we're going to play the news, and then we will come back to the other parts of the podcast. So yeah, how would your approach with expert teachers who've been in the game a long time, who are very proficient in certain ways, who may be, if I use the phrase, stuck in their ways? How would you break down those barriers, and how would you almost support them in their role?
Well, I painted the picture of the novice teacher, and I hope anyone who is at the beginning stages appreciate it. I have a lot of empathy for that situation. I also have equal empathy for someone who's on the other side of this continuum. These are teachers who have seen a lot of leadership come and go, right? Some of them have been through multiple building renovations. I mean, I'm sitting in a building here that is 1 year old, and there have been teachers who can remember the old building and, the time that a rat scurried through the hallway and the time that, they could tell you stories of when it was crumbling and when they renovated it and when all the water tasted weird when you were drinking from the water fountains. They've been here for a long time, and they're not going anywhere. Their expectation a lot of times is that someone like me is just going to fly through and just be replaced with someone else. And the same goes with all their materials. First, we started with math expressions, and then we went to math connects, and then we went to math, whatever the next thing is. And we had leadership telling us to get the kids to inquire and discover, and now they're telling us to instruct directly from the front. And when will this end? And really, if I can just shut my door and I can teach, that's where my biggest impact is. It's in the interactions between me and my students, and me assessing their needs and me moving them forward through really good instruction. And all of that is correct. I mean, nothing I just said is wrong. I think starting by understanding that situation, I'm 33 years old, almost 34. There are teachers who are about twice my age. There are teachers who have kids who are my age. And so I think really being humble and approaching this as this is not another thing, this instructional coaching thing I'm putting on you. This is not something that's being that's replacing something you used to do or eliminating something good from your practice. What this is what we can make it together. And you see how different I'm already speaking in terms of like co-constructing or facilitating with sort of more expert teachers, as opposed to being more directive, opposed to sort of telling the novice teacher what to do. I do believe that that's the case in general, that essentially if you've got a teacher who has all the pieces, you're looking to identify with them something that they've wanted to try, or maybe you're looking at something that they haven't noticed about their teaching, but you don't bring it up like you haven't noticed this before, have you, with your teaching? You're more saying like, hey, what have you tried before and why did you use this strategy? And they'll tell you. I've worked with expert teachers who will tell you, I've tried everything you've said over the past 30 years at some point in time, and I've landed on this, and these are the reasons why. And we explore those together. It might not seem like you're really building capacity by having these kind of discussions, but it certainly builds trust, and it allows kind of them to open up, and it allows them to really feel like their job is being professionalized. So I probably would spend maybe 3/4 of my time with new and inexperienced teachers, and maybe 1/4 of my time with really experienced teachers. but that's how I kind of handle it differently. I will say we're talking about novice and expert. You can be a novice at one certain thing in your teaching while being expert at other things. It's really about the domain we're talking about. Retrieval practice didn't, at least the term didn't exist until recently. People use retrieval-like things, but a lot of people don't really understand the mechanism behind retrieval. They don't understand that, like, by pulling it out of long-term memory, essentially telling, it's almost like a survival technique. You're saying that this matters. This is going to come back up later. This is useful to me, and it sticks longer. Like all of that kind of discussion is relatively new. So with an expert teacher, we can dive into things that they have not heard about, that they're relative novices about, and we can build their expertise in those discussions and in the coaching cycles as well.
And as you say, it's that co-constructing what retrieval practice. You may be doing this in the past, but actually what's the research say? What's the cognitive science say? How can we tweak it? How can we co-construct it and do that? I was nodding along and laughing when you were saying about you're 33, 34 years old and you're working with these teachers with children that age. And I'm working similar age, a little bit younger, and I've been working with heads, and I look up to them, but then actually we're very humble. We co-construct, and you're completely right. Is a new area. My area of expertise is pedagogically first use of technology and how we can use that to support explanation and modelling, or ways to support retrieval practice, or how we can absolutely transform how pupils showcase their work and what does pupil practice look like. So I come from it almost with that ulterior motive, but it's all about teaching and learning and that coaching at the same time. And we have these conversations, we questions, we challenge each other. And it's a really fascinating opportunity with that. Going to have a little break. We're talking now. We're going to go to the news. And then when we come back, we're going to talk really about, we've talked about supporting teachers, but I really want to say about almost the coaches side. Have you, and we'll come back to it afterwards, but have you helped other coaches in your area, or what are some of those effective strategies that you have used in your coaching career that other coaches could pick up and really utilize? And then at the end, we're going to go over your dogmas of effective coaching and some of those misconceptions, and we'll do that as well. So here's the news for the last week, and we look forward to hearing you back in a minute.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The debate around immigration took a turn towards education this week as the UK government announced that foreign postgraduate students on non-research courses will no longer be able to bring family members to the UK. According to the BBC, the University of Wolverhampton has already criticised the new plan. Whilst Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the move would help bring migration down, Dr. Rachel Morgan-Guthrie from the university said students who came with a support network were more likely to succeed. Last year, 135,788 visas were granted to dependents of foreign students, nearly 9 times more than in 2019. In the same period, 680,000 foreign students studied in the UK. There was also a division within the government as some wanted to see the ban on dependents extended to all postgraduate students, whilst others, including Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, argued that there were economic benefits both to universities themselves and the wider community. Vapes have regularly appeared as a topic of concern for many teachers, and a recent report into substances found in illegal vapes is likely to raise further issues. The BBC reports that vapes confiscated from school pupils contained high levels of lead, nickel and chromium. The results of the test showed that children using them could be inhaling twice the safe limit of lead and 9 times the safe amount of nickel. High levels of lead exposure can affect the central nervous system and brain development. The majority of the vapes analysed were deemed illegal and had not been tested before being sold in the UK. So-called highlighter vapes, designed in bright colours to look like highlighter pens, contained unsafe levels of the metals coming from the e-liquid. The government has allocated £3 million to tackle the sale of illegal vapes, but critics say it is not enough to deal with concerns around the number of children gaining access to these products. In Scotland, school meal debt could be scrapped in some additional areas after North Ayrshire Council agreed an action to investigate the impact the debt was having on families and schools. Head teachers of local schools are regularly reminding parents they owe money, according to the story in the Daily Record. 12 councils across Scotland have already abolished this type of debt. The increase in families struggling with paying for meals has been attributed to the cost of living crisis. Many schools have reported parents struggling to feed children and resorting to sending pupils to school with inadequate packed lunches or, in extreme circumstances, keeping children off school to avoid accruing more debt. Finally, and staying with the topic of food, STV reports that in Glasgow, free school meals have been so popular that head teachers have had to stagger lunchtimes to ensure everyone can eat comfortably. The increased uptake of children in P1 to P5 accessing a free meal has again been attributed to the cost of living crisis, meaning more families are needing to access certain benefits. But at least everyone is getting a good meal, and the staggered breaks have helped kitchens and dining halls to cope. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm considering how easy it is to get distracted when researching on the internet. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a young person and have set myself a task of writing a report on the greatest invention of all time. I'm also not going to use ChatGPT. So, my first online search shows a lot of people claim the wheel is the greatest invention, and let's face it, there are a lot of them around. There are 9 million bicycles in Beijing, and that's a fact. That's 18 million wheels just on bikes in one city, if we assume nobody has a tricycle. This led me to want to know how many bicycles there are in the world. The answer I found was an estimated 1 billion. That's 2 billion wheels, again assuming nobody has a tricycle. Now I want to know how many wheels are there in the world. Another search tells me there's an estimated 37 billion, 24 of these billion being toys, and the next biggest share of 8.4 billion being on cars. A quick scan of the results page poses an additional question I hadn't considered. Are there more doors or wheels in the world? Well, I simply have to know. In a few clicks, I find out it's estimated there are 48 billion doors in the world. So based on this research, there are more doors, and isn't a door a great invention? Yet it's not been proposed as one in my prior searches. And if there are that many doors, how many hinges must there be? The amazing thing about the internet is that there's always an answer, and the way search engines deliver those answers are designed to keep you interested and active. So potentially you see more ads and make them more money, which doesn't help get that report written, does it? Does your school teach young people how to research effectively? Do our young people realise how much they are advertised at? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, why not get in touch at TC Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to the conversation we're having with Zach Groeschel, who is an instructional coach based in Seattle. Now, so far we've talked about, do you need to be an expert to be a coach? What's the coaching cycle look like? And that idea of trust as well. Now, before we move on to part 2 of tonight's conversation, I really want to explore this idea of how can we help coaches level up their game. I know in the UK, in England specifically, actually coaching may fall to the assistant or deputy head, who's the teacher and learning lead. But actually, Zach, what would your tips be then for coaches and coaches you may have worked with, leveling up their game and making sure they are providing the best service possible to the teachers?
Right. Well, I mean, one thing that we do here is we have like a PLC, like a professional learning community between instructional coaches. That just basically means there's a bunch of middle schools around here that have instructional coaches at each building, and we meet periodically to sort of go over, to go over our jobs, to discuss how our cycles are going. A lot of times in these meetings, they're not nearly as productive as you might think. I often tweet about just really how a lot of instructional coaches PD is really around, I feel, complaining a lot of times about teachers or about stressing over, my role is so ill-defined, or I don't have enough support from my principal, or, teachers don't ever want to talk to me. And these are all like real concerns. But often enough, we don't talk about how to teach and how to coach. And so really, what we do here is we use these PLCs, these meetings between coaches, to when I host right here at this school, I will have an agenda basically that has exactly what we're going to do today, and part of that will be going into classrooms with teachers having some sort of forewarning that there will be like a small group of coaches coming into your room with badges on. And we're going to be looking for things, and we're also going to be kind of exploring Zach's mind, who is the instructional coach at this building. We're exploring sort of his process through how he deals with different instructional problems, with different situations. And a lot of times in those discussions, we bring up what we sort of just discussed around novices and experts and teachers at different stages of their journey. I'll say, so, this teacher, Mr. Smith, he's brand new to the school. He started with having a lot of issues with behavior management. Here's some of the things I did. For example, outside of his room, I had them all line up in a single file line, and he stood at the door, and then he greeted each of the students and would only let one in at a time, and they had to go get their materials, and the materials were directly in front, right as they passed it when they got through the door frame. And that broke down a few times, and so I had to model it. And I think we've gotten to a point where now it's automatic with Mr. Smith. I'd love for you to look at his entry routine, and I'd like to see if he gets that strong start to the lesson right after the do now is over, and see if the structure, what would you add to this structure? And we go and we watch it, and we come back and we discuss. And sometimes you get a lot of talk about beliefs. Maybe they maybe they don't really believe in do nows, or they don't really like that structured approach, or, can't students just find their own way to their seats and have a bit of a chat at the beginning of the lessons? And so we may discuss philosophical things, but it's mostly the practical, sort of the technique around a classroom and what I did. And I think I passed that on to them so they can maybe try that out with their teachers. I think we need to really refocus our training of instructional coaches around how to teach. A lot of my meetings with instructional coaches, I'm not extremely confident in my discussion with them that they really mastered teaching themselves. I'm not really confident that they could actually describe teaching to someone else in a way that was, I'm not trying to be mean, but like not even really remotely sophisticated. And so it sometimes maybe too much of our emphasis around this leadership stuff, around the relationships piece, winds up leading to coaches who are put into that role too early, who don't have enough expertise in teaching. And then the PD just reinforces that, where it's, we're going to talk more about kind of the problems with this job rather than the problems in the classroom that you're tasked of helping other people solve.
Hello, Saki, still there?
Hey, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello. Hello, hello. Excellent. Glad you can hear me.
My end.
I hear you now.